back for part 2 of the previous episode on anarchism through history. Here once again with Brandon Martin, of course. Brandon, welcome again. So soon. It's pretty rare that on my show we do 2 episodes, one next to each other, so soon. So it's pretty great to have you back on and to talk about this topic once again for other important facts and data and discussion in general about the ideas of anarchism in history. So Brandon, again, thanks and welcome back.
Thank you for having me back on. And yeah, I'm not used to doing episodes back to back like this, so this is kind of exciting as well because it's fresh in my mind. And I've been looking forward to this to get back on here and discuss some more about this topic. I think it's very critical that people put in the due diligence to understand history, or we're doomed to repeat it, obviously. And I know that from my personal experience being raised in an anarchist environment, most anarchists don't even know the literature, the history. They don't know the ideas. They have a sliver of just a little component of like what anarchism means to them, and that's it. And it's usually just this idea of radical rebellion against any form of control, which is a great place to start, obviously. But there's no scholarly work or intellectual work being put into it. And because of this, I see that they fail to adhere to principles or even be able to understand the failures of the ideas being implemented through history and why those failed. And then we see, like what we discussed last time, we see people who are supposedly anarchists who are actually Antifa and cultural Marxist, things like this. And it ends up being a very detrimental thing for the community and the well-being of the species, obviously. And like I think I pointed out before, I just hope to educate people, and I hope to whet the appetites of individuals into the topic, because there's no way we could cover every little minute detail of the history. We're just covering all the big pivotal points and having a good discussion about it and giving our critiques and our ideas about it. And I just hope people do more research into this, because I see that that's a big failure in the anarchist and punk communities and rebellion communities. They should be more astute when it comes to these topics. That's for sure.
Oh yes, I do agree. And as we said last time, also pay attention to the ideas and to the fallacies and ultimately to the failures. Because definitely in the ideology, those are clearly visible, according to for what I think. So yes, we have to be careful to do away with the ideological failures and get into some better philosophy and a more sound foundation. Which again, we've talked about, the importance of knowing natural law, objective morality, and especially, the responsibility to truth, which is something that is lacking in, what you've called the various rebellious community and anti-state communities in general. So I hope we'll definitely get into some of this also today. And as far as the history, I think we left, as far as the chronology goes, I think we left pretty much around the 30s, probably, because we covered the Russian Civil War, and then we mentioned something about the Spanish Civil War. So we are around that time, and which is also a little bit the time of the decline of the ideal. And I had there was something that Emma Goldman wrote on her last published document, before she died in the 30s, and she said that now it's it's kind of ironic thinking about it, because it's it's repeating, this thing is repeating itself nowadays, maybe, at least from what I'm seeing. She was saying that now the fact that at that time people were really cheering for dictators and wanted dictatorships, and someone and a strong man to save them, and that generation had yet to understand that they ought to save themselves. And so that this fact that she was talking about, how people now cheer for dictators as they are the next messiahs, etc. It really parallels, I think, contemporary history as far as what I'm seeing. There's a lot of cheering for, even if people who are against the system, there's a lot of cheering for these messianic figures coming in via politics or something. These politicians, these presidents, dictators, and it really seems that that's really what they want. Even if people who call themselves freedom-oriented, but they always have, some figure like Trump or or Putin or similar. So I'm seeing that, unfortunately, really that's happening. That's what's happening today also.
Yeah, it brings to mind, I'm sure you're familiar with it, the book The End of All Evil,
yes,
by Jeremy Locke. And in his appendix in the back, he defines words, and two words that I'd like to bring up. One, he brings up democracy, and it's supposed to be equality of your power in the system, and it's supposed to bring out fair, justice in the system. And he defines it as perfected evil, and I agree with that. I absolutely agree with that statement. And then he also defines anarchy, because he uses the term anarchy in the colloquial sense, the common sense, right, as a form of chaos. And he says, and this is very interesting, and it takes a little bit to understand what he's trying to say here. He says, there is no such thing as anarchy. There is only tyranny or no tyranny. And what that means to me is that the way he associates anarchy is, kind of like light in a way. Like, there is no such thing as darkness. There's only light in the absence of it. So there's either freedom or not. There is no percentages of this. And a lot of people critique his his rhetoric with the word usage, but I think he's actually promoting anarchism. It's just that it's very hard to stand behind certain terms, because these terms can be limiting for us. So I don't care what you call it. Obviously, I don't care. You can call it freedom, you can call it voluntarism, you can call it non-coercion, you can call it whatever you want. I don't even care if you have a word for it. You can call it liberty. I like the word liberty. But anarchy just happens to be the crux of not only the problem when we're talking about property, but it's also the crux of like the philosophy and what I would call the epistemic issues, the knowledge issues, because to me, anarchism, to be able to say that I am completely against all forms of coercive force, I have to have a justification for that in my philosophy. And what would be an epistemic justification, a justification in knowledge. And what this means is that at some level you have to have a thirst and an understanding of an objective truth. Because without the objective truth, then everything that comes after that will be nothing but relativism and subject to change at the whims of, culture and time and place. And I think that's one failure that we do see, is that, you know, this goes into property as well. I think it's one failure that we do see when we're talking about anarchism, is that they don't have a sound philosophy through the ages to solidify their movement and unify their movement with universal principles. And we see that because the principles waver. Now, by all means, I didn't live in these times, so it's very hard to say, looking from an outside perspective, and be like, you know, I wouldn't, you know, that I wouldn't do the same thing at that time period, because these are very brutal times, you know, and we don't really know what we would do in certain situations until we're actually put in them. We can imagine, we can, you know, think about what we would do, but a lot of people, you know, they make compromises where you think that you would not. And when you're in war, you know, you do things that you would never think that you would do, you know, and that's why having sound principles is so important, because the more solidified and calcified these principles are in your mind, the less likely you will break those, you know, those principles. And, you know, I guess what I'm trying to say is that I know that in hard times, people make hard decisions. So a lot of people will want to blame the anarchists for their failures by, you know, being involved with the Marxists, for example. And yeah, and it's a failure, and we need to learn from that. But at the same time, you know, they didn't have major examples of Marxism to show them, hey, this is going to massively slaughter and murder millions of people. You know, it was still a new thing emerging. You know, the applications of it hadn't been so widespread that now we have, like, you know, millions of dead bodies to look at and be like, yeah, that's not such a good idea. Though if you are a sound philosopher and a truth seeker, you should be able to dispute and dismantle these ideas without needing to see those kind of negative consequences. But education, as we know, is not always in the forefront of the minds of men, and we know that not every single person in the revolutions were all educated anarchists. So, you know, it's a double-edged sword, I guess, is what I'm trying to say, throughout history. And that's what I was trying to bring up in the last episode, was like, you know, there's all this ambiguity taking place with how it's being applied. We see that it's trying to be applied intellectually, and then they radicalize with the movements of physical attack, you know, against the state, and propaganda of the deed. And then we have just so many different ways that we're trying to get our message heard out there as anarchists, right? And I think that's a big thing, because the more that we can get people to sympathize with our cause, and even hopefully even deeper empathize with it, then and resonate with it at a fundamental level by the nature of its virtue, you know, or by the virtue of its nature is what I mean, then the more likely that people will side with you during these times, right? So as an example, if the state is being hard on the poor, and you can get the poor on your side, which I'm poor, trust me, I know, you know, if you can get them on your side by aiding them with mutual aid, with, you know, arming them with medicine and things like this, usually you're going to at least get sympathy from those people, more so than them giving sympathy over to the state, because you're the ones helping them. You're the ones keeping, you know, the chaos from unleashing, you know, its turmoil onto them, and you're protecting their families. So that's something I've always contemplated with my anarchist friends, is like, hey, you know, we just have to be here for the people, because then they see that we are not their adversary, you know, because that's what people see us as, is their adversary. And we don't want that. We don't want people to see us that way. But also, we're not going to compromise to be like, yeah, we're going to be friends with you because you're advocating for coercive force against me on through the hands of the state. So, it's a very difficult position. I think the anarchist position is the most difficult that has ever existed, because you literally stand against the world. You stand against the entire world with your ideology. And that's a hard place to be. You're like Atlas holding the world up on his shoulders, very hard place to be. So yeah, I just thought I would give a little bit of clarity on that, because I think it's important that people know the realism of being in this position and understand that it is just truly being human, and an anarchist is just a human. That's all they are. They're a human that cares. They have a principle of care. That's it, and that principle of care means that they respect each individual's liberties. They respect the individual rights, the inherent and immutable rights that we all have. And I think that's pretty simple, wouldn't you say? Right? I mean, it's pretty simple. Like how ridiculous is it to say that, yeah, I really don't want to violate you as an individual, and I also don't want you to violate me. Like, it's a very simple concept, and people blow it out of proportion. They are what's called a hyperbolic. They make it so complex that it ends up, losing its original and root, message, which is, hey, just leave us alone. That's it. I don't want authority in my life. I don't want people to force me to do things. I don't want you to steal from me. I don't want you to steal from my friends or family. Leave me alone, and that's it. But unfortunately, people have this mind virus, which I would consider to be the most prevalent and most dangerous psychopathology that's ever existed, which is the belief in authority. The master-slave relationship. So yeah, I think that's a good, point that must be made is, that we're just human and we're suffering just like everybody else. We're not trying to build some utopia. We're trying to end slavery. That's it. We're abolitionists, we're abolitionists to the core, and the state is the problem. And it's just an apparatus of the minds of men, because everything is created from the minds of men. So we have to change the minds. And that's why I'm a philosopher, because I know the root cause, the causality is in the mind. And that's what we see throughout history is, the ideas running amok in the minds of men are creating these conditions. And that's why it's important to study history.
No, I wanted to say regarding this fact about utopias, that something I actually wanted to mention is that people worry a lot about people wanting a utopia, while they're forgetting that the place we are right now and that we are going to is actually dystopia fundamentally. So
right. Yeah, maybe you should be worrying about the other. It's so true, right?
Because the first critique that you have is about being a utopian, while when actually you are trying to cure this dystopian disease that we are into, and the dystopian world that we are facing even currently. There's no need to watch sci-fi or go too much into the future,
Yeah, just open your window.
Here,
yeah, just open your window.
Yeah,
it's there. Just look all around you. It's totally here. If you're willing to open your eyes and see, it's so true. It is a dystopia.
Like Ripley screams in Alien 3, I'm telling you it's here.
Right. That's so true. That's so true. And nobody wants to listen.
Yeah.
They never want to listen. It's hard. I have to say it's hard to have the knowledge that we have and see the world the way that we see it. It's hard to interact in it. It's hard to interact with people, you know. But that's also the beauty of it, because if you're capable of doing that, you show not only your resolve, your courage, but you also show your true integrity, you know, as an individual. You're a real motherfucker is what you are. You know, you're a real person. That you can look around and you can see the iron fist of the state coming down on everybody, and everybody just laughing and enjoying it and saying, yeah, this is exactly what I wanted. And you're like, whoa, you know, like, are you sure? Like, really? I don't think that's really what you want. You want that for your kids? Like, really? So yeah, I find that it's interesting because I try to talk to a lot of people about this, and when you like break it down real simple for people, usually they agree with you. But as soon as you start using certain terms, anarchy being one of them, they immediately start, you know, shutting off. When they shut off, then you've lost the ability to get through to them, because they immediately have an emotional reaction. And I call this emotional mind control. They have been emotionally conditioned and traumatized to respond in certain ways to certain terminologies. We see this all over the board. If you can control the way people feel about the words that you're using, then you can control how they behave when they hear those words as well. And then you can control the ideas moving through history, because then you're stifling those ideas from being able to be resonated in the minds of men and be able to be transmitted or, you know, shared in groups of people in society, because they're not going to talk about it. And if they do talk about it, they're going to talk about it negatively. So, yeah, I think a lot of people have been emotionally mind controlled to look at anarchism as the devil, as Satan, you know, as terrorism, as we talked about before. You know, you're a bunch of terrorists. And it's like, yeah, I don't really think so. I mean, look at the state. They're the war machine. They're literally the war machine. And it's funny because people listen to music like Pink Floyd and, you know, all this music that's talking out against the system. And then they're like, oh, yeah, fuck you, anarchists. And it's like, what? You like Pink Floyd. You like all these anti-war messages in movies. You know, you like Blade Runner. You like, you know, whatever it might be, Apocalypse Now, whatever you're into, you know. And it's like, but didn't you get the message? You know, like, what, isn't that what you know, isn't that the good, like being good? Like, I don't know. People are ridiculous. But yeah, I wanted to add some stuff from the last episode, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure. Go right ahead.
Yeah, so I want to go all the way back to ancient Egypt, and I wanted to give just two more examples of the anarchist ideology that I meant to add in the last episode and just kind of overlooked. One of them is kind of interesting. So there was this revolt in the 12th century in Egypt during the reign of Ramses III. And there's a lot of interesting history with Ramses III. He also was a red-haired, blue-eyed pharaoh, which is extremely rare. And so there's some weird stuff going on already. But there was this guy, Setne Khamwas, and he led this rebellion against Ramses III. And this was, like I said, 12th century BCE. This was during the New Kingdom of Egypt. And Setne Khamwas was a prince of a royal family. So we find this a lot. We find that princes tend to rise and like have some connection to rebellions. You know, like people connected to royal families throughout history tend to like rebel against that because they're on the inside and they can see it. You know, they see what's going on, and somewhere along the line they had some modicum of principles, and they're just like, yeah, this is ridiculous. But so he, this individual eventually became known as the high priest of Ptah. And Ptah was one of the earliest Egyptian deities, came before Osiris, and Osiris being the last. That's a whole nother topic, obviously. But he led this peasant revolt in the region of Thebes, and it fueled all this controversy through the Egyptian culture. And it ended up being a big political thing, and a lot of political changes took place because of that. Eventually, he was caught, specifically him. We'll always find this, too, that they always go after the leaders, and then when they use the leaders as a message, which kind of is like a killing of a king ritual, and they'll usually execute them. And to cut off the head, get rid of the head, and then the body will die, right? And it's usually what happens. It tends to happen that way. And that's what happened here. They caught him. Supposedly they executed him. Some say that he was exiled and pardoned by Ramses III. It's an interesting story because if he was pardoned, then Ramses at some level most likely had some kind of sympathy for his revolt, maybe some kind of semblance of respect for that, even though it was against him. And we find that, we're human. Things like that happen. So that was an interesting thing that I thought I would add. There was another one, which a lot of people already know about, Akhenaton. And so he was a pharaoh, Akhenaton, and he rejected, this is very interesting, he rejected the New Kingdom's polytheistic religion. Okay, so when we're talking about this, we have to understand that anarchism also has an anti-religious ideology that runs through it, because in many definitions, no gods, no rulers, right? I happen to not be an atheist, so I don't use that. I use no gods, or no masters, no slaves, right? Or just no rulers. Because the definition doesn't necessarily mean no gods, but archon gets tied in with gods because it gets tied in with rulership and the hierarchical structure of like the pinnacle of the apex of who's at the top, right? So a lot of anarchists rebelled against all forms of religion. Akhenaton didn't like the polytheistic religion that was going on, so he rebelled against it and established again a new form of monotheism during this time period. And it's kind of interesting because polytheism in Egypt actually is kind of a misnomer, even though a lot of people believed in it, and they still do. The polytheistic idea is really just monotheism, just as a little bit of a little extra knowledge here. And this is because every little deity, the Neteru in Egypt, all the gods, they are all aspects of the one great spirit. They are broken down compartments of how we define the attributes of the one great spirit. But it wasn't being explained that way properly. And as we start to lose the integrity of the traditions of the mythos and the eschatology, as it starts to decline, people actually start believing in, these deities as real things and start worshiping them. And then there's a battle between like my deity is stronger than yours, and they emotionally identify with them. It's an interesting concept that we see. So Akhenaton challenged the authority of the priesthood specifically and sought to decentralize the power. So he's a pharaoh who's fighting against the priesthood at this time. So the religious mind control. So I thought that this would be a good thing to add in there into our exploration, because it's not just the state, even though a state is a religion really, but it's also these examples of fighting against the church, fighting against the priesthood, and that's really important to understand that anarchists were at the forefront of this. Now, by all means, he's not technically an anarchist. We're talking about the root idea of rebellion against authority, mind control, oppression, and things like that, right? So we're talking about the fundamental nature of what anarchism is before we have the solidified, concept of it. So some scholars have argued that Akhenaton's religious and political reforms were, kind of the precursor to anarchism. So like you can find mainstream scholars who are like, yeah, this is like a precursor to anarchism. So I wanted to bring that in because he rejected institutionalized authority, and that's in the church and the state, including himself being in the position of pharaohship. So I think that's kind of an interesting thing, right? I think that's
yes, and yeah, so it's kind of similar to what happened with the Ptahhotep in.
Yes, that's right. And yeah, I wanted to fix that. It's Ptahhotep. I meant to, I mispronounced that the last time, and I was like, oh man, I wanted to say that too. I had that in my notes. Yeah, it's a good example of that, and we often find this. I mean, the King Arthur legend is kind of very similar to this. We find, like, imagine if you're born into a royal family and you're born to be king, and you yourself are an anarchist, right? And you reject the idea of monarchy, you reject the idea of authority. But you're in this very particular position of, like, if you don't step into that throne, then what's going to happen, right? So all this stuff, all this fear comes up, like what happens to the people. As an anarchist, you care about the people. Is there going to be war? Is there going to be chaos? Are like the people not going to be taken care of? So especially back then, could have been a very dangerous position to not, take that position. Though you probably shouldn't just take that position, based on virtue and based on principles. But if there's no other option, and you take that position, what do you do then? At that point, well, your best idea is to try to reform what's going on at that time period. We don't need that now. I'm just talking about in the past, like how this may have been applied, right? And usually we see that it's a failure. It doesn't work out the way that we would hope it would, idealistically, right? Never does. But yeah, I mean, so I can kind of sympathize with, like, being in that position and being forced to, like, look at what's going on. Imagine if you're in that position when you know that you're about to be invaded by a state, or another monarch, right? And you're an anarchist, and people are looking to you to be the leader. What the fuck do you do? There's a lot of different weird things like that. If I was in that position, obviously, probably would try to dismantle the entire idea of monarchy from the inside of it, working with the people, trying to get people to not worship me, because even if you didn't take the throne, people are still going to have this belief, and that's what you're really fighting, is this belief. So even if you didn't take the throne, people are still going to be like, oh yeah, you are the king. They're still going to, project that onto you as the king, and that's hard, even if you're not in the throne. Because the people will, by de facto, try to make you that thing. Imagine if you're just out in the streets and you have no royal gowns on and you're just, trying to help people and maybe create a decentralized militia or something. Yeah, that's a difficult place to be. And they're like, you are the king, like, we bow to you. And you're like, no, I'm just a human being. I'm just like you. And they're like, no, I can never do that, sire. And you're like, stop calling me sire. Right? It's like, so you have to change the minds of men, and that's a difficult thing.
Yes,
because
ultimately it always comes down to personal responsibility. And I mean, today there's not, or there shouldn't be, really, but there's not that type of nations that you had in the past.
That's right.
So it really is even more important to step into our personal responsibility and realize the illusions in which we believe in. Because nobody else is going to dismantle those for us. So that we see historically that doesn't that doesn't, maybe it had happened sometimes, but that really doesn't work. And anyway, generally it doesn't happen today. Definitely doesn't happen. So
no, and the monster is way bigger now. You know, it's way bigger.
Yeah,
so,
all the bases are covered today. You know.
Yeah.
As far as the power structure goes.
That's right.
People still have this illusion to be liberated by someone, but that's not gonna happen.
Yes.
How, you know, it's really a delusion.
That's right. Yep. So yeah, I want to give a caveat, I suppose, which is that I'm not saying that idea should be applied today. All I'm saying is that you know, in those positions in that time period, you know, those are difficult choices that an individual that stands for true liberty and justice would have to make, right? And that does kind of relate to like the Arthurian legend in some way, which is kind of interesting. Another thing I wanted to add was that we kind of covered some, you know, things in Greece. I wanted to add the school of the Cynics, okay? And the Cynics are very interesting because what I kind of see as the Cynics, you know, a lot of people will just associate them as the stinky, you know, garbage punk hippies, you know, the people who are somewhat anti-establishment, anti-institution, but they're skeptics at some level, rigid skeptics, and they're mockers. They like to mock everything, right? They like creating discord. And it's not really about like holistic freedom or anything like that. It's more so just a selfish ego thing. But at some level, they have a virtue of just owning my own being, you know, owning my own thoughts. They have this like weird virtue about that. And a good example of this is Diogenes. He embodied this principle of simplicity, you know, living life to the simplest. And, you know, he likes self-sufficiency as well, you know, and radical honesty. And he fought with all the philosophers. You know, they would make jokes and jest with each philosopher, specifically Plato. Him and Plato really got into it a lot. So yeah, he was a kind of an example of kind of this rebellion against the cultural norms of, you know, authority and things like this. And he would make public statements. You know, some say he lived like a dog. You know, he lived on the streets. He was a beggar. But he had interesting ideas because he did kind of, you know, he traveled all over the place, and he did take up some of the teachings of Socrates. And, you know, he was a poor person, so he could relate more with the poor than the middle class, right? So he really related. Some often said he was found sleeping in ceramic jars or tubs in the marketplace of the Agora, right, of Athens. And he kind of embodies this idea of non-orthodox leftism in a way, which is interesting because anarchism gets tied in with leftism, quote unquote anarchism, right? Because it's non-orthodox, even though we know that that's not what real anarchism is. That's, you know, the whole Marxist stuff and all this stuff, but he rejects this idea of like wealth, you know. So that's one thing that he rejects as well, and the idea of privilege. And that his like whole philosophy is that true happiness and virtue could only be found through self-sufficiency and detachment from worldly desires, which is kind of an Eastern tradition, Taoist, Buddhist tradition, detachment from the worldly desires, right? So some of these ideas have components of anarchism in them. So, you know, I thought I would bring him up because I think he was kind of just positioned to Epicurus. We talked about Epicurus, and he's like, they're both being this sovereign being in their own way. Epicurus is the sophisticated philosopher of this idea. Diogenes is the, you know, the garbage punk dude who's living in a trash can, who kind of espouses a similar concept, rejects institutions, but not organized, not sophisticated, not really inspiring a solidified philosophy that's practical for everybody, obviously, because everybody could not use that philosophy, and actually live, but he did believe in an idea of freedom and self-autonomy. And that's why I bring him up, because he had concepts of self-autonomy. And I think that's important to note. And just as another note here, Epicurus was a Stoic. So we know that we got the Cynics and we got the Stoics. And the Stoics are there. It's interesting. To be Stoic means like you can take anything at some level, right? You have like no emotions about it. You don't respond. Some people think it's like the lack of emotions. And it's not really. It's more about just self-ownership and not allowing things to control you. That's really what Stoicism was really about. It's just like not allowing things to control you. But Epicurus was a Stoic, and he founded the Epicurean school, and he fought for individual freedom, and he also fought for a form of hedonism as well, which was, he very intimately put a point on the pursuit for pleasure. So, I just wanted to kind of bring up those two as you can compare and contrast their ideas in history if you do study them, and you can see the differences. I personally agree with Epicurus a lot more than Diogenes, but I know a lot of anarchists that look to Diogenes. And what it reminds me of as a cynic, I'm not a cynic, but as him being a cynic, it reminds me of the people that I deal with on many levels, being involved in the punk industry and the anarchist movements, because you have these things like train hopping punks, the folk punks, the garbage punks, and all these people kind of espouse this Diogenes idea, but yet they have no power to create change. And in many cases, they end up being Marxist. And it's very, very dangerous,
Well, you'll have that with this sort of ideas that tend to go towards pauperism and anti-proprietarianist in a way. So they gravitate naturally to Marxism and communism and these ideologies.
Right. They've relinquished all ideas about property, and including like taking care of themselves at some level. It's like taking it's kind of interesting, because it's like they think it's some sort of self-awareness and self-autonomy, but in truth they're actually not taking care of themselves,
and that's usually not a good place to be, actually. So you're not going to be really capable of influencing much change.
Exactly. And most people don't even know who Diogenes is. I mean, I remember I had heard about Socrates and Plato and Aristotle, but never heard of Diogenes. So that just shows like his ideas obviously were not solidified, and they did not carry throughout history. And that's very important, because what we're trying to do is make sure that our ideas are accessible to future generations, especially when it comes to anti-tyrannical and draconian, means that are taking place, because it's just getting worse and worse and worse. So yeah, I just wanted to add those two little examples, the Diogenes stuff, and then also the Akhenaton ideas, as a little bit more of some context of earlier ideas of anarchism.
Yeah, that was very interesting. That's and again, not very much discussed. We usually don't go that back into the past to look at anarchistic ideas or their roots even. So yeah, especially about Egypt, that was quite interesting, and that was dynastic Egypt already. So that was the time where we have full on slavery implemented. So
that's right. And I think it's also interesting to give examples of people who are in positions of power who are trying to, dismantle the system, because we see that that's kind of like a poster boy current, right? Like this idea, like Trump, for example, supposed to be this person who's rebelling against,
he's outside the system.
He's not a politician. Yeah, he is too a politician. What are you talking about?
I mean, okay, not to get into it that much, but just the amount of evidence that and things that are pretty much self-evident that are there to tell you that these people are not outside the system. It's just phenomenal how we still really our mindset. We have all this knowledge at our disposal, but our mindset didn't really change. And you realize the problem is still that belief that we have about authority, and the fact that we really want to believe in in a Messiah, this messianic faith that we still have, even in the face of knowledge and reason and intelligence, basically. But,
yeah. No,
so, we see how little in that sense has changed from the ancient past, where we were actually more justified in not knowing something because it was impossible for us, for the most people back then. So
yes,
now we do have we are culpable now in most way, in many ways. So
yes, we totally are culpable. There's no reason why the mass amount of humanity, especially those living with access to the internet or technology, or even access to being able to communicate with others who do have access to that, there's no reason why we don't have a sense of semblance and of unification with these ideas now. Yeah, there is no justification for it at this point. But we can skip over all the other stuff. Just wanted to add that in. We can skip back up to around 1930s, 1918, 1930s, where we left off. And it's kind of interesting because, like we had mentioned, anarchism kind of dies off at this point. We do see people like you had mentioned, Emma Goldman, who's speaking out, and a lot of I think many anarchists died during this time period too. Due to sickness.
Yeah, Emma Goldman died in the 30s after writing her last letter that was published. Then we had the Malatesta in Italy, died in 1932 under house arrest in Rome. He was under house arrest, obviously, under fascism. And I think who was Nestor Makhno died around this time in Paris in exile.
Yeah, I think before this too, Emma Goldman's student, DeClaire, died.
Yeah, she died pretty soon.
Yeah, she died. Yeah, I think it was like 1912-ish.
1912, yeah.
Yeah, she died from an illness. Something that I did want to mention, because we tend to focus on the Western idea. Well, I just wanted to give a little example of some Eastern anarchism. So there was a female anarchist and journalist in Japan during the early 1900s. Her name was Kanno Sugeko. And I believe that's how you pronounce it. It's Japanese. So Kanno Sugeko. And she was accused of treason by the Japanese government, and her alleged involvement what became known as the High Treason Incident, aimed at the assassination of the Emperor Meiji. And she was hanged in 1911 for her anarchist ideas, which she was never proven to have any, connection truly to this, event of this attempted assassination. But she was at the forefront of some of the libertarian and anarchist ideas, and she was speaking out against the ideas of centralized authority in Japan. We see what happened to Japan with the westernization of Japan. I mean, you can't even have guns there now. Like it's completely locked down.
Yeah,
completely.
And at that time they became a very a militaristic power.
Yes.
They were they were basing themselves a lot on the on the Prussian model and obviously British and US model. So they became basically the quintessential military power, and dictatorship also, because it was a very authoritarian country, extremely authoritarian country. Only with Western type military capabilities. So.
Yes. It's extremely intense over there. So,
yeah, and in those places you also have there's this. The people generally have this, remissive mentality, so it's pretty incredible to see people with libertarian ideals even over there, I guess.
Yeah, it's super incredible. You know where I find a lot of those ideas actually? Kind of interesting. I find it in their art, their artistic culture. It's very interesting. So, for example, anime happens to be what I consider to be punk rock cartoons or anarchistic cartoons. And the thing about it is that all the forms of art were always pushing against the censorship of that time. So if you look into anime, there's always this pushback of like trying to get around the censorship that the authorities are implementing. So they work around it and find these loopholes in the laws to be able to, get their art out the way that they wanted to. So it's kind of interesting. And you do find more philosophical and very rich philosophical stories that are anti-authority in a lot of anime, a very mass amount of them. One thing about Kanno was that she was originally a socialist, and after the red flag incident, which is known as the red flag incident, she was imprisoned, and then she converted to anarchism after that. She came out and stated that something to the effect that I think I have her quote here. While I was in prison, I resolved not to rest until I killed Prosecutor Takeyomi, the enemy I had grown to hate, which was an authoritarian at that time. And we were raised in a revolutionary movement. I was determined that the first thing I would do would be to hurl a bomb at your head. This is what was used against her in the treason thing, the high treason thing. If I hurled a bomb at you, I imagine your lifeblood would gush with just about as much vigorous as you would had when delivering that courtroom address, wouldn't it? Oh, and this is because she wants vengeance. So after this, she ends up converting to anarchism. This wasn't the statement I was thinking of, but she obviously was a very brutal individual. Very, very, very brutal. And I mean, that's what happens when you start to oppress people. You're backing a person into a corner, and they'll become vicious, and you have to be careful about that. But she pretty much just goes on to say she just, is wrong in her ideas and her approaches. And then she goes on to write a bunch about, because she was a journalist, she goes on to write a bunch about how socialism has failed and there's no hope for socialism. And then she goes on to advocate for, decentralized authority and anarchism later in her work. So it's kind of interesting. She's a interesting female, and she's part of the anarcho-feminist movement, which is the purple black flag, which has been co-opted, obviously.
Completely, yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
completely co-opted. It's insane how much has been co-opted. So yeah, at the beginning of the First World War, most of the anarchists at that time, I think there was a Russian anarchist, V.M. Valin. He stated anti-war sentiments, and a lot of anarchists were just pretty much anti-war.
Yeah, he was with Macnon.
Right.
Volin,
Yeah.
Yes.
Volin. Yeah. So yeah, he goes on to write a bunch about, how the anarchists should not be involved with the war. And that's a difficult time. You're in World War I, and we haven't seen anything like that to that degree, obviously, especially with the implements of the military tech. And yeah, it's insane what was going on, obviously. And so it had to be extremely difficult as an anarchist to get your voice heard or to do anything at that point, So it kind of makes sense that they kind of all went underground. And even, a lot of them were drafted. A lot of them were, killed. Yeah, so I think that time period, I think Kropotkin was also anti-war in his sentiments during this time period. He was a big voice of anarchism during this time period, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, he was. He's one of the most famous anarchists of all time, actually.
Yeah.
And he wrote Anarchist Morality or Anarchist Morals, something like that, which was basically pretty much the golden rule.
Yeah. And we see that it's they're kind of taking up the non-aggressive principle at this point, right? Because what had happened, right, is like we were talking about in the last episode, we have all this terrorism, quote unquote, taking place, right? And then a lot of the anarchists are like, well, this isn't working. This shit isn't getting us anywhere, right? Like the state's just escalating, and now they're killing us off in droves. So we went back to the intellectual literature side. And then we have also another one that I don't know if we mentioned as well, which was Josiah Warren. Josiah Warren was, and he had the school of mutualism that he based his whole ideology off of. There was another anarchist this time period. A lot of people don't know this, but Henry David Thoreau. He was an anarchist, and he, advocated for a more direct, personal relationship with nature. We'll find this idea. This is what I wanted to get to, is we'll find this idea about reconnecting with nature, running through anarchism, and it starts to get more and more relevant as we move through the history. And I think that's kind of like where we are at, now, is that we understand that nature is the solution, because we understand that there are, laws in nature that govern the consequences of the behaviors of beings with the capacity for holistic intelligence, which we call natural law. And without this, we can't really, create any kind of world of freedom, because morality and freedom are directly proportional with each other. And a lot of anarchists never really, at least back then, didn't really have the knowledge or the capability to spread that idea. And natural law wasn't really a solidified philosophy through anti-authority movements.
Yes, as we said last time, it was really more for the actual philosophers rather than the anarchists or the activists or those who were involved in the anti-authoritarian movements. So
yes, absolutely.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, very unfortunate. So yeah, I mean, we have I think that's where we should take it, because we've already been recording for an hour and a half, I think. We should take it to what's going on in the current situation of anarchism, right? So I want to ask you a question. How do you feel about the current situation of anarchism, especially like in Europe? You know.
Well, as I said on part one, I don't hold anarchists in high regard, or at least what people, those that are portrayed like in the media as anarchists. All these movements that we have that go at demonstrations to start trouble and supposedly fight with the police, even though I believe that most of these movements are infiltrated, so there's really no telling, who's doing what, if they're cops or people who are just paid or people who are just misled and are there to break things up and destroy things, etc. So as far as these types of anarchists, obviously I don't even, the Antifa type, I don't even consider them real anarchists, actually. But I've looked around, the internet and various publications and blogs, etc. And while they have some things that I agree with, it's actually the minority of what they're saying. I agree on a few things, a few basic things, but I'm not impressed. So long story short, not impressed for the reasons that we already mentioned. That's really, first of all, they're really still compromised too much with certain types of ideologies that are actually authoritarian, usually tending toward left-wing authoritarianism. And yes, there's a general rejection of the principles, first principles, truth and objective morality.
Very well said.
Because it's associated with, oftentimes they associate it with religion, and as you said, they come from mainly an anti-religious or maybe mostly anti-clerical point of view. So they tend to associate it anything that we can say we could call metaphysical, which is another ambiguous term today.
Yes.
Not very well understood. It simply means beyond the physical, so really beyond what you can see and beyond something that necessarily is proven in a laboratory. And people don't really understand that. So anything that has a semblance of that, it's completely rejected in the name of being anti-religious and wanting to fight religion. So I think that's a huge issue, and that usually goes for various types of anarchist currents, not just the socialist ones. And basically that's really what I think. They have this belief that men, that we have the last word on what's right and wrong are, and we can dictate what law we can be. Ultimately, they still hold the idea that we can be the arbiters,
right,
of law, actually.
Right,
so
right.
Only they don't like they don't like the state and the authority of the state, but they still think that man ultimately is the higher power. Otherwise we go into religion. Basically, that's what they're saying.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better, actually. I mean, I think that's the crux of the problem. And then obviously, like we had mentioned, property is a big issue, because it always comes down to property. Because if you can't define what property is, then you can't have private property. And if you can't have private property, then you have no individual autonomy. And if you have no individual autonomy, then that means you are subject to be a slave to others who claim that. And you have no means, you have no epistemic means to justify self-defense, because you can't defend your property if you don't have any. If you can't even justify to yourself that you actually own it, you have no means to ideologically, philosophically, justify using force against someone who's trying to take that from you. This is why anarchism has been involved with anti-corporatism a lot. So a lot of ideas about corporations is very ambiguous, because the lines of property get blurred dramatically in corporations because there's so many people. It's the idea of shared property, which ties in with the socialist ideas and Marxists. Now, I take the position of stewardship. Obviously I own myself, and I own my body, and I own my product of labor, and I own the things that I've created, and I've owned the things that I've acquired, rightfully acquired specifically, without using any form of coercion. Land is a very difficult thing to understand ownership of, but we do understand that at some level you do own your place, because you have possession of it, you maintain it, you have healthy maintenance of it, and you did not take it from somebody else at some level. You did not wrongfully acquire this terrain, you could say. So yeah, corporations are very, very interesting, because that's one of the things that socialists are always fighting against, right? And Marxists is capitalism and corporate overlords. And we know now that corporations are pretty much are a state. At one point they were smaller states, and now they're a giant state. Now, I'm not against free markets, because I'm a free market anarchist, obviously. I'm for voluntary exchange. I'm for all that stuff. So I don't have an issue with people cooperating with each other and, having businesses and things like this. But we do see a big issue with the kind of power that corporations hold over this world currently. And we see that corporations and the states work hand in hand together, even though they don't want you to know that, because really they have the same thing. They really are the same thing, because it's all about the control of the production and distribution of property. And that property doesn't just mean like physical items. It means blood and flesh. That's what the state is, about blood and flesh, whether that's about the justice system of blood and flesh or about the trade system of blood and flesh, right?
Yes.
And that is, yeah.
So I think it also creates this false dichotomy between corporation and state that many people advocate for a return of the pure state, without it being subject to the corporations.
Right.
So they say, well, the problem today is that corporations have taken over government. We need to go back to government being separated by corporations. Well, they don't really understand really how that power dynamic works.
Right.
And it's, the difference. There is no difference, because actually the corporations need the state, because the belief in authority concerns the state.
Mm-hmm.
People don't believe in the corporations. The problem is the belief in authority, and
yes,
that authority is held by the state, which can then favor corporations, giving them monopoly, calling it free market, so people will hate the free market.
Yes.
and that's corporations. Why do corporations have monopolies? Because they have laws. They are protected by state intervention.
Right.
So that creates this false dichotomy between, pretty much like the false dichotomy between church and state.
Yep. I was going to say that.
We have the false dichotomy between corporations and the state. So now we have the statists in freedom advocate groups that support the state to be protected against the corporations.
Yeah.
And that creates just this this loop of slavery, of never-ending slavery, because people still believe, still hold that fallacious idea of the belief in authority.
That's right.
And one other thing I wanted to say, yes, with these corporations and the state, and their concept of property. Now we get into the usurpation of property. So property in many cases has been usurped by these two powers, basically, the state and corporate power.
Right.
So that's why we have, for example, Proudhon probably understood it with his statement that property was theft. Yes,
right.
The property usurped it was theft because, and it still is when we are talking about the usurpation of it from the state and the corporations. So there's a lot of usurped property, actually.
That was good. I completely agree with that. Another thing I'd like to bring up is that, since we're on the topic of property, this would be a good subject to take us out with, is the whole idea that the elites, the controllers, they want socialism for us. That's what they want. They want us to have socialism. They don't want socialism for themselves. They totally understand private property. They totally, understand the need to protect their assets and them personally,
Which
they
is
don't
not rightful, which theirs.
Yeah, it's not
in most
right.
cases not rightful property, not rightful
right,
ownership,
absolutely.
because it wasn't obtained with rightful means. So in that case, that their property is most likely theft in most cases.
That's right, absolutely. And this kind of idea is based on dialectical materialism. That's kind of the root of Marxism at some level, because Marx, is taken from Hegel, and using his ideas, but he critiques Hegel's ideas and converts it and contorts it into something different. But that root idea that he's using is dialectical materialism. So this is really the idea of the issue of the dichotomy between spiritualism and materialism, where anarchism, this is one fundamental issue I see with anarchism, is that it's not rooted, but currently it has this overtone of just materialistic ideas, and it leaves out, like you said, metaphysics and spirituality, and it doesn't put spirit first. It doesn't put principles first,
because they consider it religious thought. So
right, that's right. They consider it a religious thought, and that's part of the issue. And then it leads us into this completely materialistic world and materialistic ideas. And with that, we understand that actually is the root. That's part of the root problem of authority. That's part of the root problem of property, because we have to understand that we're part of nature. We're not separate from nature. We're part of it. And we're here to steward the environment that we're in. And we have a responsibility. And that environment is our body, too. We're here to inhabit our bodies and take care of our bodies and treat them as sacred. This is why the indigenous cultures, thought of everything as spirit. Everything in the physical manifested world is all spirit, the leaf, the dust, all this stuff. And to have a respect for that is really important to understand. You don't have to take it to the degree of radicalism where you're like, oh, I can't use a tree branch because it's spiritual, which is like this crazy radical puritanical idea where we do see this in religious movements where they have to they can't step on things because they're interfering with the natural process. Well, that's not being real, that's not being realism. You have to have a respect and a understanding of sacredness for it, but understanding that these things are here with attributes for us to be able to harmonize with and use for certain outcomes as well. To harness elemental powers, to harness nature and be able to work with it, not against it. And that's what the forefront of the anarchist movement to me today is about getting back in tune with our nature of sovereignty, the nature of living in this world together and finding a place for our ingenuity and our ability to work together in a mutual way, to co-create this world into something positive, And I think that's why it's important to study the history so that we see how these ideas fail, because the ideas are the most important. It's not really about all the little details. It's about the ideas coming through history and following the most powerful ideas. And we can see, as we've explained, the most powerful one is the belief in authority, and it even plagues the anarchist. You know, it plagues the anarchist. It's a religious idea. It's funny, anarchisms are kind of hypocritical because they hate religion, but then at some level, some of these quote unquote anarchists, call them fake ass anarchists, they have this religious notion of authority at some level. We see that with Antifa. We see that in the current day with the anarchists that supported Trump, which is ridiculous. Because I have friends. Well, I was going to say I have friends that were anarchists and for years and years, 20 years, and then next thing I know, Trump comes out and they're like, "I'm voting for Trump." I'm like, "Well, you're not an anarchist by the virtue of its nature, then, because you're just swayed by the whims of like some poster boy that you happen to emotionally identify with. You don't really believe in anarchism, or you would never even consider doing that. What you believe in is you're just waiting for the right person to change the system. And Trump
exactly.
was him."
Yeah, and that's another thing I wanted to say. First of all, something about ownership and stewardship. Because there's another kind of dichotomy. However, the owner is the steward of what he has.
Right.
So they go hand in hand.
That's right.
I think those two concepts go hand in hand. Really, there's no real separation between them. And yeah, also another thing regarding what you just said, it's this. I think this is also part of the decline of the anarchist movement, not just the leftist ideology, not just because of their espousing leftist ideologies, but also the other side, actually, the other side of the political spectrum. And this is it's more niche, I guess, but you see this today, with the anarchists going for this right-wing strongman, leaders, and that's unfortunately that's a real plague, I think, and constitutes really a kind of shameful decline further decline of the anarchistic ideal, because they just, as you said, they just needed the guy that they think is going to be the savior to just going back to being statists, and they, in the name of of some real supposed realism that's not really gonna that's just really gonna bring people back into the hands of politics, actually.
Yep.
And politics, is part of the problem. So they are simply being actively part of the problem. And again, there's this big there has been this cultural appropriation of especially libertarianism and even some libertarian anarchism that it's being appropriated by the right wing, by the political right wing.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and you can see that in the rhetoric of many of these alternative outlets on social media, or via this all this sort of community, if you want to call it that. Before 2016, they were kind of, they had all these anti-government sentiments, and now they're back into being, hardcore statists in the name of, it's like saving Western civilization, especially is another big one.
Right.
And being realistic and stopping the left, because that's the most important thing, and then we can go back to being libertarian or even anarchist or whatever. So. I see that as it's a big issue nowadays with some of the, even though possibly a minority, but with some of the anarchists of self-proclaimed anarchists, actually, and this is linked with the whole globalism and nationalism dialectic that we have also. That
mm-hmm.
obviously people say, it has been used to bring back people again into the arms of politics.
Yep.
Again, because obviously the globalists are the number one enemy. So that apparently is reason enough to, still vote for statist slavery and having this completely, authoritarian people, supporting these authoritarians in power because supposedly they are against global government, supposedly. They have all these draconian measures that they even tell you they want to implement, and they, not to mention all the foreign wars that they want to keep fomenting. And
oh my God, right.
So, and so yeah, that's something I'm seeing.
Yeah, I see that as well. Globalism is one of the main issues, and we do see that unfortunately anarchists have their own, at least the fake ass anarchists have their own measures that they want to implement, which end up being exactly the same measures that the abusive state is using. And I don't think that you're talking about the ebb and flow, of like moving towards freedom and then moving back towards slavery. And this ties in with the Overton window, which is part of political science, and trying to get people into the Overton window, the people on the fringe, the people on the outskirts, so that they're inside the political arena. And anarchism has been swept in, with that. And, like with the Trump stuff, that was a total sweep. We see it all over the world. It happens over and over. And I think two things I'd like to say is the anarchists do not understand the occult. They do not understand the occult. And since they don't understand the occult, they will be easily manipulated, because the people that are running this stuff are they're master psychologists. They're absolutely master psychologists, and it's an interconnected network of a cabal that has all this esoteric knowledge, that understands the human psyche, understands human emotions, and they understand how to get what they want, and they're in alignment. That's one thing that they are. They're in alignment with their goals, with their agendas, and that's why they're getting it done. And that's the problem with the movement that we see, is that we're scattered. We have all these we have all these different versions of like how we want to apply it. And it's like, no, you don't understand. Like that's called balkanization. You're balkanizing the ideas. You're splitting them all up, and we balkanize epistemology because of that. The justifications for our knowledge and everything, for even being anarchists. And as long as it's balkanized, then it's like we're fighting with each other. And that's divide and conquer. It's the most common tactic, and I know everybody understands that, but they don't see it when it's happening to them. They know what it is. They don't see it when it's happening to them, though, and that's part of the issue. It's because it's happening.
And they clearly show that they don't understand the power that they are supposed to fight.
Right.
Like, they don't understand that. I don't know how they can see, nationalism as the lesser of two evils when it's still the same draconian prospect.
Right.
And it pretty much it's just going to serve to build this giant police state that's going to be used to impose this sick will of politicians and those that are above them, onto us. It's it's incredible that people who are supposed to know better don't really know how the false dialectics and false dichotomies work. It's all to get you back into the hands of power, into the hands of religion or into the hands of politics. So basically, into the hands of slavery again. So
yeah, luckily there's a couple of us out here that are staying consistent. Living in the alignment with the law of non-contradiction. We have to not be hypocrites when it comes to these things and stay consistent. And there are solutions. There's grassroots solutions, and I think some of those solutions are becoming more self-aware, doing introspective work, doing the shadow work, understanding the occult, and then starting to expand that outwardly and understanding how mind control works. Are your likes even your own? Are your ideas even your own? Where these ideas come from? Healing from traumas. There's all kinds of methods to get yourself in order first, because you have to make your own bed. You have to clean your own house first, before you can start dealing with all the, geopolitical issues that are going on. You need to focus on, what's going on within you, because you're contributing to the whole, and you're contributing to what's going on in this world. And when you get yourself in alignment with things like natural law and gain self-mastery to some degree, then you are capable of creating better. You're capable of creating consciously. And I mean, we have a direct responsibility to evolve the species. We have a responsibility to evolve the species. And what I mean by evolution is tapping into higher levels of consciousness, tapping into higher levels of our biology, and also being able to produce more freedom and liberty across, because that inspires, ingenuity, creativity, camaraderie, solidarity, things like this, integrity in a culture. To truly have a civilization, you must be civilized. What do we mean by civilized? It means to first be civil in yourself, and then you can start to be civil with others, because you can respect the transactions that you're having with others. And I don't just mean material transactions. I mean verbal, emotional, mental, physical transactions with people, because it's all transaction based. If you want to use that term, even though that's an economic term, it's really just a sociological term that means like, hey, we're interacting with each other.
All types of interactions. Yeah.
Yes, interactions. I think this has been a great episode. This has been awesome.
Yeah, it's been great. I think it's it aids well enough, our part one, and yeah, we've covered a few interesting things that needed to be covered, like the some of the critiques, especially of of some of these anarchistic ideals. So
yes.
So I don't know. Do you have any closing statements or things you want to say before we end here?
I will just say to anybody who's listening, thank you for paying attention, and thank you for your time and your effort. And if you have any questions or anything like that, you can find my email address at my website, seedtruth.com. Always willing to reach back and assist in any way. And, if you're looking for sources, books, anything like that, I don't mind sending a list over for more, of information, more information on this topic, because, I think it's a very, very critical topic. Understanding history is so important. And that's it. Thank you. Thank you for having me back on. Always, it's always a pleasure talking to you.
Great. Yeah, likewise. And thanks for having me here. You also have a book coming out on anarchy, actually, throughout history.
Yep.
So if you want to mention that once again for people, what they can expect in the near future.
Yeah, I have 3 more chapters to write on this book, and then I'm going into the process of publication. So I'm hoping that it will be out at least by the end of this year. And it's going to be a very in-depth coverage of, and trying to be non-biased as far as I can, just to cover all the points, all the transitional points of anarchism through history. And a lot of the things that we talked about are in this book, but then there's so much more there's so much more in this book. It's insane how much I've put into this book. And then I have a new series coming out that I just released a new trailer for. It's called Beyond the Forbidden Veil. It is a series on the occult. It will be an episodic series, usually less than an hour each episode. But I will be diving into symbolism, totemic sociology, esotericism, history, anthropology, just so many different things that are all wrapped up in the occult world. And it's going to be a completely new style of work that I'm doing. And you can check that trailer out at the Seed Truth Academy YouTube page, and you can get to that through the website as well. Very excited about that series. It's going to be really fun, and I think people are going to learn a lot from it. A lot of good information there.
Yeah, no doubt. We are looking forward to those. And yeah, that said, I think we can close it for today. And thanks again, and see everybody on the next one.